Hello, fellow historians. I'm Andrea Henderson. Welcome to this graduate course, World War II in the Pacific. Our discussion today is from Module 6, Okinawa and the Cost of Victory. So do me a favor and do yourself a favor, pause the video and grab your handy-dandy notebook and a writing utensil if you don't already have those in hand. You're going to need them here in just a few. Now, I want to give you a warning that this lecture includes historical photographs showing extensive wartime destruction and ruined landscapes, which some viewers may find unsettling. The images depict physical property destruction only. No injured or deceased individuals are shown. So let us start with a historical problem rather than a topic. By the summer of 1945, many people involved in the war already believed the conflict would end in something catastrophic before it actually did. Not just costly, not just difficult, catastrophic. Historians have wrestled with why that expectation formed. People did not yet know exactly how the war would end, but they had begun to imagine the scale of violence they thought it would require. To understand that shift, we have to look closely at one place, Okinawa. Not because it was the final battle and not only because of how destructive it was, but because participants and observers came to see it as a preview. The battle changed how they thought the war itself worked, and once expectations changed, the range of imaginable endings changed with it. So the question guiding this lecture is simple. What did Okinawa teach people in 1945 about how this war would end? Quick review of the Battle of Okinawa. It was codenamed Operation Iceberg. Okinawa is an island about 62 miles long and roughly 2 to 10 miles wide. It is the largest island in the Ryukyu island chain. The island chain sits roughly 900 to 1,000 miles south-southwest of Tokyo, Japan. To compare, the main archipelago of Japan spans roughly 1,900 to 2,000 miles. During the 7 days prior to the battle, roughly March 26 to March 31st of 1945, U.S. naval guns fired more than 13,000 large caliber shells. That's about 6 inches to 16 inches. In total, 5,162 tons of ammunition was expended on ground targets. The Task Force 58 flew 3,095 sorties, targeting enemy aircraft, small boats, and amphibious vehicles. Underwater demolitions teams had to clear the area and the approaches to the island so that they could make landfall. And the locals called this time the Typhoon of Steel, or Tetsu no Bofu. Forgive my pronunciation. The battle itself lasted 82 days, April 1st, Easter Sunday, to June 22nd, 1945. Okinawa was occupied at the time by the Japanese 32nd Army. Roughly 100,000 men were led by Lieutenant General Mitsura Ushijima. The U.S. 10th Army, led by Lieutenant General Simon Buckner Jr., consisted of over 180,000 troops. By the end of the battle, 12,000 American lives were lost, the highest number of any single Pacific battle. Roughly 70,000 to 110,000 Japanese soldiers and Okinawan conscripts lost their lives, and an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 civilian lives were lost. Okinawa did not resemble earlier campaigns in the Pacific in two crucial ways. One, the number of civilians impacted, and two, a decisive breakthrough never really happened. I'm going to expound on each of these in this discussion. On April 1st, L-Day, or Love Day, U.S. forces landed on the beaches of Okinawa almost completely unopposed. By the 4th of April, the 10th Army held a slice of Okinawa 15 miles long and 3 to 7 miles wide. Instead of defending the beaches, Japanese forces constructed layered defensive positions inland. Construction of cave and underground positions had begun a year earlier in the summer of 1944 in anticipation of this battle. The original strategy was to avoid a decisive land battle until kamikaze planes and boats, along with the Japanese fleet, could destroy the American warships and transports. Ushijima made the decision, once he realized that it was impossible to defeat the Americans, to hold the island as long as possible and inflict the maximum number of casualties as possible. Having selected the southern third of the island as the main battle position, the Japanese planned a series of concentric positions adapted to the contours of the area, taking full advantage of the terrain, of course. Caves, blockhouses, and pillboxes were built into the sides of hills and escarpments, and they were connected by elaborate underground tunnels, and they were skillfully camouflaged. You might recognize some of the names of the areas where most of the heat of the battle took place: Kakazu Ridge, Hacksaw Ridge, There was the prolonged Shuri Line fighting, Sugarloaf Hill. That was actually a complex including Horseshoe and Half Moon. The attackers advanced, but advancing did not seem to really end the fighting. Each ridge line revealed another fortified line, and each captured position exposed a new defensive zone. Progress existed, but it did not resolve the battle. And geography really mattered here. Ridges, caves, and reverse slopes meant that firepower alone could not collapse resistance quickly. The battle stretched not into days, but into months. And the operational rhythm shifted from movement to grinding. Participants began recognizing something really important here. Victory did not automatically produce a conclusion as it had previously on other islands like Peleliu. A battlefield could be won and still not be finished. For soldiers, the experience reinforced this notion or this realization, and combat was constant but rarely decisive. Instead of major engagements ending resistance, they encountered persistent opposition, hidden defenders, repeated counterattacks, and terrain that erased the idea of a secure rear area. Fighting became cumulative rather than climactic. Victory was no longer a moment in time, it was an accumulation of destruction over time. While the boots on the ground were coping with this grueling conflict, the enemy counterattacked by air and sea with about 4,000 Japanese planes destroyed and 10 organized kamikaze attacks using a total of 1,465 planes. And all of this mattered psychologically as well, but especially the stall on the ground took a toll. Earlier battles could be imagined as difficult steps toward an eventual breakthrough, but 82 days in Okinawa suggested something else. The war might not end not through a single decisive confrontation, but through the exhaustion of one side's capacity to continue existing in an organized form. That implication extended beyond the island itself. Okinawa also disrupted another assumption, that the separation between battlefield and society. Civilians were present everywhere. They were in shelters, in caves, they were in movement corridors, and in the contested terrain. The battle did not occur beside a civilization or a community, it occurred within one. This altered how participants interpreted the nature of resistance. Fighting was no longer only military units opposing military units. Combat existed inside a social environment that could not easily be isolated or bypassed as it had on other islands. For observers, this suggested a troubling projection for the future. If a relatively small island produced this kind of prolonged resistance involving an entire population, what would happen on the Japanese home islands? The battle began to function as a model, not just a fight, but a forecast. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to pause the video, but I want you to take note of the directions first. I'm going to ask you to look at a couple of photographs and write your immediate reaction, not analysis at first, just the response you have to seeing this. Second, I want you to write a factual description of what you observe. Avoid interpretation. Simply record the details. Resume the video once you've completed those two tasks. Okay, welcome back. With the photograph still on the page, I want you to consider one final question. If military planners believed future fighting would resemble this, what expectations about the end of the war might they form? Go ahead and pause again if you need a moment to form your thoughts, and resume when you're done. Reflecting on this exercise, I challenge you to think about what mattered historically was not only the destruction itself, but what people believed the destruction represented. Okinawa became interpreted as a preview, an example of how resistance might unfold when fighting moved on to Japan's main islands. Observers did not assume future battles would be easier. They assumed they would be larger versions of the same pattern. This reframed the strategic problem. Leaders were no longer deciding how to defeat an opponent in a single climactic encounter. They were estimating the scale of destruction required to end organized resistance across an entire society. The battle narrowed imagination. Possible endings to the war began to cluster around outcomes capable of avoiding a multiplied Okinawa rather than winning a traditional decisive battle. So by mid-1945, expectations had shifted. The question was not whether the final stage of the war would be violent. The question was how many times the experience of Okinawa would have to be repeated. In that sense, the end of the war emerged from prediction as much as from action. Decisions were shaped by anticipated futures, by what participants believed the next battlefield would look like based on the last one they had seen. Okinawa mattered because it changed what the future seemed to require. Understanding that shift helps explain why the final phase of the war unfolded the way it did. Not as a sudden departure from earlier fighting, but as the result of conclusions drawn from it. The ending of the Pacific War cannot be understood only through weapons, orders, or dates. It must also be understood through expectation, through what people believed they were about to face. And Okinawa is where many of those expectations formed. Before we go further, I want to be explicit about our purpose here. We're not trying to determine whether a decision was right or wrong. Instead, we're trying to understand the range of expectations people believed they were facing when they made those decisions. The goal in this section is not to argue for or against a decision, but to examine the perspective that shaped it. Treat this as one interpretive lens, a way to analyze how contemporaries understood their situation, not a verdict on their choices. In 1945, U.S. President Harry Truman approved the use of the atomic bomb after the Interim Committee, a high-level advisory group, recommended it, seeing no acceptable alternative. Secretary of War Henry Stimson headed the committee. Other factors went into the decision to use the bomb, obviously, one of those being 250,000 to 1 million U.S. casualties anticipated or projected if the U.S. invaded the mainland archipelago of Japan. The main point here is that the Battle of Okinawa was seen as a preview of what was to come. 82 days to gain control of a 62-mile island. What would it take to gain control of 2,000 miles? And with that, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.